legislatures across the country making laws on everything from abortion to gun control. Political analysts have a close eye on many of these statewide races, especially in states where there could be a shift in the balance of power.
Actually, I know Catherine, my colleague, is going to be talking to you guys about fentanyl as well, but specifically on guns, I'm assuming you wouldn't support then a universal background check.
I did.
In the San Diego sheriff's race, the top two vote getters from the June primary are facing off for a position that hasn't been vacant in 12 years. Some of the challenges the next sheriff will face is trust within the community, jail safety, and hiring. I know that in his last stop, which was in New Mexico, as you mentioned, he was campaigning on behalf of the Democratic gubernatorial candidate there. He spoke a lot about student loans, and so you might imagine that here being at a college campus again, that's something that might be of interest. In the primary, John McCann got 30% of the vote and Amar Campanajjar got 22% of the vote. But Campanajjar was one of 5 Democratic candidates who split the Democratic vote here in Chula Vista. And another race we're going to be watching very closely is the San Diego City Council District 6 race. There are 2 Democratic candidates there, no incumbent. Kent Lee is facing off against Tommy Howe. Now, this race was extremely close in the primaries. Kent Lee ended up getting 41% of the vote to Tommy Howe's 37%. We've talked a lot about the battleground 49th congressional district, but what about all the other districts in our area? One thing that's a little bit confusing this year is there's new districts with new numbers and new boundaries after redistricting happened, which takes place every 10 years.
There's also been a lot of concerns raised about the need to reform policing and the criminal justice system. How do you address this while balancing the two?
We got our live friends back, so let's find out who we got. So polls in California, they closed about 30 minutes ago, so we're going to take a trip out there. Joining us now from NBC San Diego is Priya Sridhar. She's joining us. So let's start by discussing the governor's race there. Governor Newsom is running for re-election. There are speculations, though, that he plans to run for president also. So does that seem to be having any impact on voters' confidence in him or willingness to vote for him, Priya?
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting is there was actually a special election last year to recall Governor Newsom. There were a lot of people here in California who weren't very happy with some of his pandemic policies. As you may remember, there were some of the most strict restrictions here in California compared to other states across the country. He, of course, was able to stay and keep his seat after that special election. And so this election cycle, it was very interesting to see that, you know, there wasn't a real strong challenger. There's a Republican candidate, but of course this is an extremely blue state, so it doesn't look like Governor Newsom's going to have any problems defending his seat tonight. We did see him actually spend a lot of his campaign money in both Florida and Texas. He had attack ads against Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott, which was really interesting, and that's what signaled to a lot of political analysts that perhaps he could be making a run for president in the near future. But of course he would have to have that get signed off by the National Democratic Party and of course Kamala Harris, who came from California, who's now the vice president. So there's still a lot at play there, but it's certainly been an interesting one to watch.
Yeah. And I know California also is one of those states that's not just voting for people, but also for situations, for things, for measures. So there's sports betting proposition that is also being voted on. What if people, how have they been reacting to that?
Yeah, that's a big one here in California. So the Supreme Court in 2018 overturned a federal ban on sports betting. And since then, almost 24 states have legalized sports betting in some capacity. California hasn't done so just yet. But of course, this is one of the most populous states in the country. So there's a huge market here, millions of dollars at stake. And this statewide proposition there's been millions of dollars in campaign spending on both sides of this issue. So there's 2 propositions, Proposition 26 and 27. One would call for sports betting to be legalized in tribal casinos and card rooms. The other one would allow sports betting to happen on your phone. So that one's going to be a really interesting one to watch. There are some big players like FanDuel, you guys might be familiar with, who have poured a lot of money into this campaign. So I know a lot of Californians are anxiously awaiting to see if it gets legalized, and if so, in what capacity.
Yeah. And, you know, we have been just having discussions for a while now since Roe v. Wade was overturned about if the issue of abortion was going to drive people to the polls. Democrats were hoping that it would. Have you seen that in California? People telling you, I am here because I'm worried about this or because I'm against this?
Absolutely. You know, I heard my colleague over on the East Coast talking about it over there, but here in California, that's the proposition number 1 on the ballot for California, to enshrine a women's right to choose, so essentially abortion rights in the statewide constitution. Now, of course, we saw over the summer when Roe versus Wade was overturned, it basically gave that decision back to the states. And here in California, the right to abortion is pretty much protected, but this would take things one step forward. And many say it was very strategic for the Democrats to put this on the ballot in some capacity, because there are some congressional seats that are sort of up for grabs right now, and also some seats in the state assembly and the state senate. One of those districts that actually has been in the national spotlight is the 49th congressional district. The Cook Political Report has called this one of the 35 districts that are toss-ups. Now, of course, what we've been talking about all night is the Republicans who are hoping to retake the majority in the House of Representatives. They're hoping to do that by flipping this seat, the 49th congressional district, which spans from San Diego County to Orange County. Currently, the incumbent candidate is a Democrat, and actually just last week, we saw Joe Biden come to our region to campaign on behalf of the Democratic incumbent candidate, which was extremely interesting, because you would think that Joe Biden might be better spent, campaigning in states that aren't as blue as California, but he decided to take his time to come here. And in that race in particular, there's been a lot of talk about abortion rights. So I think that issue on the national level is certainly trickling down to congressional races and also state races. So that one that, at least here in California, everyone has a close eye on.
Yeah. And Priya, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I wonder if there's any ballot measure or even race in California that you think could go in a direction that would be surprising to Californians, because it is so traditionally blue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, here in San Diego, for example, it's 41% registered Democrats and 27% registered Republicans, but that hasn't always been the case. And I think when we talk about what are the most important issues that are driving voters to the polls, we're seeing abortion is one of them, but probably a close second and third is also public safety and the economy. And those are the issues that Republicans are really latching onto. And I know, for instance, in that congressional race that I was just telling you about, the 49th congressional district, Brian Marriott, the Republican candidate, is really trying to zero in on that and say that the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act didn't do anything to help the average American. So that's a district that, it could be a toss-up. And another thing to keep in mind is there was a California Citizens Commission, which is an independent body of people who actually redrew all the district boundaries recently. So voters are finding that they're in a new district now, and some of those districts, because the boundaries changed, it made some of those races a lot more competitive than what they had been in the previous 10 years. Those district boundaries are redrawn every 10 years. So that's another factor that's really going to make things interesting, in addition to all the rhetoric that we see on the national level that's trickling down to these races.
Priya, I want to thank you so much for your reporting, for your insight, for taking the time to come here and have this discussion. I really appreciate you and learned a lot, so thank you. All right, we'll be right back.